I sat in the last row of the tech summit, hands folded, watching my wife, Ariella Thorne, co-founder of Thorne Dynamics, smile under the lights. My wife. My code. My life's work. She wore my algorithm like a designer dress and strutted in front of an audience she believed I didn't deserve to be in. The system she was demoing? That was mine, written on whiteboards, scribbled on napkins, tested in 3 a.m. silence while she slept. But today, I wasn't here to fight for recognition. I was here to watch. Because 6 months ago, I coded a silent execution protocol, and at 3:17 p.m., it would trigger. I came here as support, sitting as she basked in applause that echoed through every memory of my lonely vigils. Each cheer was a reminder of my invisibility and of the silent war brewing beneath polished surfaces. By the time the lights dimmed, I was ready for what came next. I had no intention of watching her steal the show today, but I needed to prove a point. I needed her to see what happens when foundations crumble, when the architect remains unseen. The summit hall hummed with excitement. Laptops open, cameras flashing, executives whispering. I could almost taste the anticipation like a buzzing current in the air. People didn't know whose code they'd applauded, but I did. I knew every function and loop. Every logical branch that controlled adaptive neural training. Every subroutine that harvested data insights and rerouted computational loads across global servers. In their eyes, Ariella was a visionary. In mine, she was a beneficiary riding the rails I laid. The lights dimmed as she advanced to center stage. When she spoke, her voice rippled through hidden speakers, confident, commanding, articulate. "Thank you all for joining," she began, her eyes scanning the hall. Some in the audience leaned forward, hanging on her every word. Some tapped away on keyboards, ready to broadcast her statements in real time. I shifted in my seat, listening to her describe features I wrote, attributes I architected in the lonely hours she never witnessed. She described latency reductions and self-healing feedback loops as if they were gifts from her own brilliance. Ariella clicked through slides behind her. Graphics danced across the giant screen. Each graph, each bulleted claim emerged from functions I built. She spoke of elegance, of streamlined pipelines, of user-centric design. What she didn't mention was my bankruptcy of a claim, my self-effacing silence, and my tireless nights debugging the very lines she now claimed as collective genius. She talked about how her system handled massive data influx, how it trimmed latency to imperceptible levels, how it improved outcomes in clinical diagnostics. She painted a picture of unstoppable progress while I felt trapped in the shadows. I glanced at my watch. 3:10 p.m., 7 minutes to go. 7 minutes until the silent execution protocol became active within the very code she was championing. I remembered how I coded it to trigger in the presence of exactly this configuration. A particular user token matched to her summit credentials, a silent command buried in an unused HTTP header, and the precise timestamp corresponding to her moment of triumph. Total control with zero detection until it was too late. Arclight, my private fork, was already deployed and ready. My phone vibrated in my pocket. 10 texts from Preston Vale, the new CTO she installed after revoking my access. He was thirsty for collaboration, clueless about the forces at play. I ignored him. I had no desire to explain that the world they praised was built on borrowed code, on borrowed trust. The world that would remain standing was Arclight, born from the ashes of Thorne Dynamics the moment this protocol fired. Light spilled around the stage as Ariella unveiled the final slide, a 3D animation of neural networks converging in a fractal bloom, radiating fractal petals of code that pulsed with promise. Applause rose like a tidal wave. Engineers at the back snapped photos. Venture capitalists scribbled notes furiously. Tech journalists shifted to record her every gesture. She paused to savor it, her smile broad, triumphant. The entire room glowed with her success. Mine burned quietly. 3:16 p.m. 1 minute. My heart drummed a staccato rhythm. Every breath tasted like anticipation. I felt the hair on my arm stand up. I replayed every moment leading here. The marriage vows exchanged in a church basement, the sense of partnership that turned into appropriation, the unspoken resentment when she branded our work, her vision, the late nights of refactoring and rewriting documentation she slapped her name on. I felt calm. I felt certainty. I felt satisfaction edged with sorrow. Ariella reached for a remote in her hand. She didn't know that by pressing that button, she was flipping the switch in my code too. I leaned forward, readying myself. My fingers itched to release the last fragment of cord that tied me to her triumph, to detach the scaffolding beneath her. She spoke one last catchphrase about discipline and execution, and hit the clicker. Lights shifted. The slide vanished. The summit hall lights brightened. The audience burst into applause once more. Then, 3:17 p.m. went silent inside my mind. It was time. I tapped a sequence on my phone. A cryptic code that pinged the Halion Labs server, executed the protocol, and set in motion every failsafes that would lock out her engineers, revert data pathways to my archived repository, and render Thorn Dynamics systems inert. I exhaled a long, slow release. My hands unclenched. The weight on my chest lifted. I didn't look back at Ariella's shining figure on stage. I didn't need to. In that instant, the world shifted, and I took a seat not just in this hall, but at the head of a new table. The audience's applause dimmed as confusion rippled across the giant screens behind her. They would see lines of code freeze, systems disconnect, diagnostics chart failures cascading. They would know, without words, whose code prevailed in the end. It didn't begin with a fight. It never does. It began with a shift. A subtle one. The kind you only catch when you stop romanticizing the silence and start listening to it. At first, it was small, a hesitation when someone asked how Thorn Dynamics began. Ariella used to say we. We started in a garage. We coded until sunrise. We took a risk. But then we became I. I had a vision. I fought for it. I remember the first time she left my name out entirely. It was at a casual pitch dinner with early-stage investors. She was sipping red wine, talking through her slide deck while I sat beside her, nodding supportively like a damn accessory. And I came up with the model after reviewing gaps in machine-led diagnostics. I knew we needed real-time adaptability, so I sketched the neural pathways over dinner one night, she said, her voice calm, effortless. My hand froze halfway to my glass. Dinner one night? I remembered that night, because I was the one sketching. She was asleep, mouth open, curled on the couch under a wool blanket while I paced and scribbled. I didn't say anything that night. I let it slide. I told myself it was nerves, a slip of the tongue. But it happened again. At another event. Then on a podcast. By the third investor pitch, I wasn't just invisible, I was unnecessary. Disposable. At home, she became sharper, colder. She criticized my clothes, my routine, even my presence. You never look like a CEO, she once said, stepping over my shoes at the front door. You don't have the polish, Marcus. You look like a hobbyist. I'm not trying to impress anyone, I'd muttered. That's the problem, she snapped, without even looking back. There was a dinner party, one of those networking things in someone's penthouse overlooking the river. I didn't even want to go, but she insisted. Said it would be good for optics. So I put on the blazer she liked and played the role. I shook hands, smiled when prompted, laughed politely. And then, in front of a roaring fireplace and an audience of venture capitalists, she said it. Marcus? Oh, he's the high school dropout with a passion project, she said with a laugh. Can't run a company, but he's great at making coffee. Everyone laughed. I didn't. She looked back at me, saw the expression on my face, and her smile faltered for a moment. Then she turned back to the group like I wasn't even there. That night, I didn't sleep. I went down to the basement and sat with the server I built with my bare hands. I ran my fingers along its casing, as if it were a child she no longer recognized. I opened my laptop and stared at the lines of code I had written. The architecture was still there, still sound, still mine. That was the night I started planning. She began pushing me out more aggressively after that. First, it was control over the board meetings. Then, the financials. She said she was restructuring roles to align with vision growth. My login access was revoked, without warning. Security measure, she said. New CTO protocols. New CTO. That's when Preston Vale entered the picture. Freshly minted Stanford alum. Sharp suit, sharper jawline. He had the charisma investors loved and the patience of a vulture. Ariella called him an asset to the future. She introduced him as our new tech visionary. I knew exactly what was happening. Preston started holding meetings without me. Key product decisions were made behind closed doors. My seat on the board? Reassigned. I confronted her once, just once, in our kitchen. You think I'm stupid? I asked, my voice quiet. She didn't flinch. No, Marcus. I think you're outdated. That cut deeper than any betrayal. I built the core, I said. You know that. You helped. But I took it where it needed to go. You rewrote a few UI modules and booked keynote speeches. You didn't build anything from scratch. She set her wine glass down harder than necessary. You don't understand scale. You never did. You build things like a mechanic. I build companies. And that was it. The line in the sand. That night, I went down to Owen's Diner and opened my laptop. I sat in the back booth, same one I used to code in during our early days. I still had backups of the original code base, the untouched architecture. And that's where I began crafting the switch. I didn't want revenge. Not at first. I just wanted something clean. Something undeniable. I created Halion Labs as a shell company. Silent. Undetectable. I began patenting components of the architecture in parallel under my name. Bits and pieces that, if reassembled correctly, formed the beating heart of what she was parading as her innovation. I waited. I watched. I kept a list. Every press article that omitted me. Every quote where she claimed ownership of things I birthed. Every moment she took center stage while I took a seat. I converted pain into logic, rage into algorithms. I wrote the kill code not out of spite, but clarity. I wrote it to reclaim truth. She didn't know. She never once asked what I was working on. She assumed I was sulking. She thought she had broken me, but I was building something better. And Preston? He was the kind of guy who bragged in LinkedIn posts and misused technical terms in interviews. I watched him explain the system to investors using buzzwords he clearly didn't understand. I knew it would catch up with him. The truth was simple. Ariella built her empire on my foundation. And I was the foundation. I wasn't useless. I was just quiet. And now, I had built something else, something that would speak for me. A switch. One that would change everything. She never noticed the lines I left buried in the core. Not bugs. Not backdoors. Just invisible threads. Fragments woven deep into the architecture, subtle enough to pass peer review, silent enough to evade even the sharpest code audits. It wasn't sabotage. It was insurance. My fingerprint encoded in logic, a whisper in every function. I didn't set out to destroy Thorn Dynamics. I set out to reclaim it, on my terms. By the time Ariella was parading our tech around the world, I had already started building the real version in secret. I rented a backroom at Owen's Diner. Tacky checkered booths, chipped linoleum floors, always reeking faintly of burnt toast and overbrewed coffee. That place became my sanctuary. I ordered the same black coffee every day, never touched the eggs, and always plugged in with the kind of intensity that makes people stop asking questions. The waitresses thought I was just another failed tech bro licking his wounds. Let them. I needed the quiet. I forked the codebase the day after she announced her Series C funding round. She posted a champagne photo on LinkedIn, captioned, "From a garage to global, we're just getting started." She didn't tag me. She never did. I sat there, phone in hand, reading her words with a strange sort of numbness. Then I opened my laptop and began. Line by line, I stripped the old structure, rewrote modules, optimized what they didn't even know was bloated. I redesigned the adaptive logic engine and gave it a new name, ArcLight. It wasn't a copy. It was an evolution. While she made headlines with half-understood talking points and over-designed UI mockups, I wrote code that thought, healed, and grew. I taught it to analyze anomalies and rewrite its own internal models. I gave it flexibility and fire. I gave it what she never could soul. Every morning at 6 a.m., I'd walk into the diner with a backpack full of old notes, coffee-stained napkins, torn-out journal pages, receipts scrawled with architectural diagrams. I'd sit in that booth and lose hours. Once, I looked up and realized the sun had set without me noticing. My coffee was cold, the same cup from 7 hours ago. My back ached, but my mind buzzed with the kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. Meanwhile, Thorn Dynamics moved faster, louder. Ariella went from founder to icon. Her face graced the cover of TechLine, Wired, even a Forbes 30 Under 30 edition. The article read like a love letter to her ambition. No mention of Halion Labs. No mention of me. She wore my silence like armor, confident I was too weak, too small, or too irrelevant to fight back. But every time she demoed her system, every time she smiled for the camera or spoke about her vision for intelligent automation, I smiled too. Because I knew what she didn't. I knew the code she used wasn't complete. I had hollowed it out slowly over the years, replacing key modules with dependent calls to libraries I patented, replacing public processes with obfuscated dependencies that only my system could satisfy. It still worked, of course. It looked brilliant, but it was a shadow, a ghost. She ran a puppet show powered by phantom code. I had registered Halion Labs in Delaware under a different name, used a trustee, layered ownership through corporate filings and shell holdings. I worked with a patent attorney who didn't ask too many questions but understood the assignment. Lock it down. Make it bulletproof. I filed provisional patents under obscure function names and abstract methods. I didn't need to outshine her. I needed to outlast her. I took no investors. I had no board. ArcLight was mine, fully and completely. And it was working. The simulations were clean. The performance benchmarks blew past industry standards. While Ariella's system choked on edge cases, mine adapted. When her platform required downtime patches, mine rewrote its own logic trees. They had press releases. I had progress. There was something beautiful about the stillness of it all. No noise. No press. Just me and the hum of my code. I ran tests against anonymized real-world data, logistics pipelines, medical diagnostics, fraud detection. ArcLight didn't just match the results, it improved them. Each pass made the system sharper. It remembered its failures. It learned. One afternoon, I got a call from an old mentor, Dr. Roshan, my comp sci professor from the brief stint I spent at community college before dropping out. "Marcus," he said, voice warm with cautious curiosity, "I've been following Ariella's rise. You okay?" I hesitated. "I'm working on something. I always thought your code was too elegant to be someone else's footnote." That stayed with me. Ariella never asked where I went during the day. She didn't care. If she had, she might have noticed that the apartment was empty every morning and that I came home late, smelling like burnt coffee and printer toner. She might have noticed the change in my posture, the quiet calm I wore like armor. But she never asked. She was too busy building castles with borrowed bricks. I built ArcLight in silence. No applause. No stages. No funding rounds. But every time her system faltered or investors asked for a demo, I tightened my grip. I monitored error reports and Thorn Dynamics system logs, leaks I could access through dormant admin privileges she forgot to revoke. I watched their dev team struggle with sudden bugs they couldn't trace, UI hangups that made no logical sense. I watched Preston Vale fail to fix anything without calling outside consultants. The shadow was growing, and the moment was coming. The kill switch was ready. Not to destroy, but to reclaim. It would trigger when Ariella's system attempted a very specific type of data handshake, one used only in public demonstrations, like keynotes or summit expos. That trigger would reroute the architecture, exposing its hidden dependencies, locking out access, and collapsing the illusion of autonomy. Everything she thought she owned would fold like paper. The real system, ArcLight, would be right there to step in, not just as a replacement, as the rightful heir. Ariella once told a journalist, "I built a system that redefines possibility." She was wrong. She wore a mask made of my work. And masks don't last forever. Soon, the world would see the face beneath. They called her the AI Empress. It was laughable, if it didn't hurt so much. Wired ran a feature titled "The Woman Who Taught Machines to Think," with Ariella's face filling the cover, all cheekbones and confidence, arms crossed against a white backdrop like she'd programmed the Big Bang herself. Techline did a video profile that opened with slow-motion shots of her walking through the Thorn Dynamics lobby, her heels echoing like a drumline. Her eyes laser-focused ahead while employees stood and clapped like she was royalty passing through. Every soundbite in that video was the same kind of polished branding I'd once helped her rehearse in our living room. Back when we were we. And then there was Bloomforge, a platform once too obscure to matter, until they did a multi-part podcast series on visionaries of the next digital age. Ariella was episode 1. She spoke about ambition, drive, the courage to believe in the impossible. Not once did she mention who had actually built the foundation she stood on. Each time I saw her face plastered across a new article or video thumbnail, I felt the familiar cocktail of pride, anger, and detachment swirl in my gut. I didn't hate her. Not really. I hated the version of her that rose like smoke from something I once loved and believed in. I hated the version that stared back from glossy magazine covers and investor sizzle reels, polished and curated to look like a god. She wasn't stupid, though. Ariella had always known how to play to a room. She could take a technical briefing and make it sound like a TED Talk. She didn't code anymore. I don't even think she could refactor a module without assistance. But she had something most coders don't: poise. She made people believe. And belief, I've learned, is often more profitable than truth. At the annual Thorn Dynamics Gala, I attended because I needed to see it. The whole show, the height of the empire. The people she surrounded herself with now had names like Lachlan and Cressida, and they talked about synergy and scaling and brand ecosystems. The ballroom was draped in deep blue and gold, the colors of her company's latest interface update. Waiters walked around with champagne flutes balanced on trays like glass trees. Musicians played a live string rendition of a Weeknd song, and everyone pretended that was normal. I stood near the back wall, invisible in a tailored charcoal jacket I hadn't worn in 3 years. No one recognized me. A few glanced in my direction, probably thinking I was someone's assistant or a misplaced vendor. Fine by me. That night wasn't about me being seen. It was about watching her, the queen on her throne, reveling in the empire she'd built atop a scaffolding of my sleepless nights and silent sacrifices. She took the stage just past 8 p.m. The crowd hushed. The spotlight hit her in a way that made the crystals in her earrings flicker like tiny stars. She raised her glass and gave the kind of speech that got replayed in highlight reels for months afterward. "Everything I've built," she said, pausing with that deliberate breath that made people lean in, "started with a dream and ended with discipline. Some people dream. I execute." That last line, I had written it. She used to practice it in front of our bathroom mirror. She'd whisper it while brushing her teeth, tweaking the cadence. "Do you think it lands, Marcus?" she once asked. And I had nodded, because it did. It really did. Now, she used it without flinching, without footnotes, as if it had always been hers. The room erupted into applause. Someone shouted, "To Ariella," and dozens of glasses lifted in sync. I didn't clap. I didn't raise my glass. I just stood there, watching. She caught my eye for the briefest moment. I hadn't planned it, but she did. Her gaze flicked through the crowd and landed on me. And she smirked. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't mocking. It was worse. It was casual. Like I was a relic of a version of herself she'd outgrown. Like I was the flannel shirt reminder of a beta version of her life. I nodded once. Not out of respect. Out of recognition. That night, I didn't drink. I didn't network. I left before dessert and walked all the way back to my apartment, even though it was a 20-minute walk and my shoes weren't made for the distance. The air was cold, crisp. It cleared my head. It was execution day -7. 7 days until everything she believed was untouchable would be stripped away. 7 days until every investor, every journalist, every coder who bought into the illusion would see the truth embedded in the error logs, in the version histories, in the sudden collapse of a system they never understood. Because you can build a castle out of marble and glass, but if you put it on someone else's blueprint and forget to check the foundation, it only takes one tiny fracture to bring it all down. The switch was ready. The dependencies were all aligned. The protocol would execute quietly, invisibly. No headlines. No explosions. Just a slow, graceful unraveling of her illusion. And when that happened, I wouldn't even need to say a word. She would know. The war began over coffee. I sat across from Margot Severn, the CTO of Daxon Systems, at a small industrial cafe off 7th and Bramble, the kind of place where the espresso was bitter and the meetings were real. She wasn't easy to impress. Her eyes gave nothing away, her fingers laced calmly across a black notebook. She'd seen the pitches, the vaporware, the recycled ideas dressed in new buzzwords. When I introduced ArcLight, she leaned back, skeptical but curious. "This your latest toy?" she asked, voice sharp as a scalpel. "No," I said. "It's the real thing. And it works." We didn't meet in a conference room or over polished decks and talking points. I didn't come with a flashy pitch. I came with code. Live. Adaptive. Untethered. I flipped my laptop around and let ArcLight run itself. It began with a simulated dataset pulled from global logistics networks. As the nodes shifted and bottlenecks emerged, ArcLight restructured them in real time, optimizing the flow before the issue became a crisis. Margot raised an eyebrow. "This isn't Thorn's system." "No," I said. "It's what came before it. And what comes after." She didn't say anything at first, just watched as the system continued to adapt. Streamlining inputs, rewriting decision trees, identifying redundancies, and predicting failures before they happened. You built this. Built it once. Let someone run off with a ghost version. So I built it again. Better. This time, I didn't share the keys. She tapped her pen against the notebook. This looks like it's running autonomous patch cycles without external prompts. It is. And what's the backend framework? A proprietary lattice I've licensed under Halion Labs. That caught her attention. Her head tilted, and I could see her thoughts recalibrating. She had heard of Halion Labs, only whispers, buried mentions in patent logs and sandbox trials. I had made sure of that. Just enough noise to pique interest, not enough to raise alarms. You said Thorn's version is the ghost, she said. Explain. So I told her. I walked her through the genesis of the original code, the core system built in a tiny garage apartment with an air mattress for a bed and a printer that never worked. I told her how Ariella helped at first, how it was collaborative in the beginning. But then came the slow push-out, the rewriting of history, the stripping of credits, and the smiling erasure. I explained how Thorn Dynamics now operated on a version of the code I designed, but no longer authorized, and how I let them. You let them steal it? I let them build with it, I said, because I'd already started building something else. She sat back, silent, not dismissive, not disbelieving, just calculating. Margot wasn't someone you won over with pity or poetry. She needed proof. So I gave her the demo login. I let her play. I let her throw ArcLight the messiest, most entropic datasets her people had been unable to untangle for months. And it danced, flawlessly. By the time the coffee had gone cold, Margot looked up and said, "What do you want?" "An exclusive license," I replied. "You run ArcLight. You pay the rights. And when Thorn Dynamics burns down, you inherit the space they leave behind." She didn't ask for a discount. She didn't haggle. She just nodded. By 4 p.m., the paperwork was signed. By 6 p.m., Halion Labs had its first major corporate partner. That night, I sent the first volley in my war. A cease and desist letter drafted by my attorney, delivered directly to Thorn Dynamics. It outlined clear IP infringement based on architectural similarities and unlicensed use of core patented components. Attached were timestamps, code comparisons, and a full list of every line lifted or restructured without attribution. The letter didn't go to Ariella directly. It went to her legal department, her board, and the press. I imagined her reading it, probably over a glass of Syrah in her skyrise condo, jaw clenched, eyes scanning for any weakness. She'd think it was a bluff at first. Just me, that incompetent dropout, throwing a tantrum. But it wasn't a tantrum. It was an execution. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to scream for justice. All I had to do was follow the structure she helped me define, build the system, polish the narrative, control the access points. I was no longer standing on her stage. I was pulling the curtain. Her lawyers would realize it soon enough. The code she used, the one running her system's neural matrix, was protected. The kill switch protocol embedded in Thorn's production servers hadn't even triggered yet. This was the legal prelude, a warning shot, a signal to her investors that something beneath the surface was beginning to shift. The next morning, I had 14 missed calls from her. I didn't answer a single one. I let them stack like voicemails from a version of her that no longer existed. Her texts were short, sharp, demanding. The last one just said, "We need to talk." I replied with a link. No words. Just the ArcLight demo. That was the moment I won the first battle. Not with code, not with contracts, but with silence. I let the product speak. I let her realize, alone in some boardroom surrounded by execs who'd never questioned her before, that she had no idea how the thing she claimed to build actually worked. Preston Vale sent an email the next day. Subject line, terms? I didn't open it. Didn't need to. I already knew what it would say. Something about collaboration. About bridging gaps. About coming to the table. That's what they do when the narrative slips away. When the light shifts. When the queen realizes the throne was built on borrowed bricks. But I wasn't interested in tables anymore. I was interested in fire. And the match was already lit. 3 days later, the headline hit like a controlled demolition. Genius or grifter. IP lawsuit rocks Thorn Dynamics. The words blinked from my phone screen as I stood in line for coffee. Same booth, same bitter roast at Owen's Diner. But everything else had shifted. The world was catching up. Finally. I stirred my drink absently, not because it needed stirring, but because my hands needed something to do. There it was. My name wasn't in the headline, but I was between every line. The article laid it bare. A former Thorn Dynamics co-founder, unnamed but unmistakably me, had filed a sweeping intellectual property suit under Halion Labs. The allegations: unauthorized use of patented code, breach of implicit licensing agreements, exploitation of proprietary architectural structures. The reporter danced between facts and intrigue, the way tech media always does when a giant might fall. Ariella called me 14 times. She didn't leave a single voicemail. I knew her well enough to know what that silence meant. She didn't want to leave a record. She didn't want to be quoted. She wanted to control the conversation, as always. But this time, I wasn't picking up. She had left me out of the story for years. It was only fair she watch mine unfold from the audience. By midday, Thorn Dynamics issued a press release for paragraphs of carefully managed outrage. We believe this lawsuit is meritless. Thorn Dynamics has always operated with integrity. These claims are a desperate act of retaliation by a former associate. Former associate. Not co-founder. Not architect. Not partner. Just some bitter man in a hoodie throwing stones at the glass house he helped build. And yet, the cracks had already begun. Their development team was the first to notice. Lines of code that had always functioned smoothly now triggered errors. Internal systems slowed to a crawl. Their monitoring dashboards flagged cascading issues in neural thread distribution and API responsiveness. They reached for hotfixes, tried rolling back updates. Nothing held, because the code they were using expired, unlicensed, legally mine. The phantom threads I'd embedded, those invisible dependencies she never noticed, those were unraveling now. The kill switch hadn't even activated yet. These were just the preconditions, the code equivalent of a distant siren before the fire truck even appears. By evening, screenshots began to leak online. Internal Slack messages. Desperate Git commits. Developers asking who wrote what, when, and where the documentation had gone. Preston Vale, her golden boy CTO, emailed me directly. Subject: let's talk terms. He wanted to negotiate. Collaborate. Anything to make the bleeding stop. I didn't reply with words. I sent him a link. It led to a demo page for ArcLight: clean, fast, fully operational. The tagline read, "What happens when the architect never leaves?" He didn't respond. Later that night, Ariella held a press conference. She wore the same navy blue blazer she'd worn at the Summit of Intelligent Futures, a power color she once said commanded respect without begging for it. But this time, her shoulders were tenser, her smile forced. Cameras flashed. Reporters crowded the steps of the Thorn Dynamics campus. "The allegations made by Halion Labs are unfounded," she said. "This is a desperate ex-husband's tantrum. A calculated stunt by someone who didn't believe in the vision and now resents its success. We will defend our company vigorously." I sat on my couch watching it unfold in real time. No popcorn, no gloating, just the steady quiet of someone who knew this moment had been coming all along. Her words weren't for me. They were for her investors, for her board, for her curated image of strength. But even through the screen, I saw it. The tremble, the shift in her eyes when someone shouted, "Can you explain the source code discrepancies?" She deflected, moved on, because she couldn't. The truth was, she never knew how it worked. She couldn't defend the architecture because it wasn't hers to begin with. She was fluent in surface, slides, soundbites, symposia, but not in substance. And now, substance was what mattered. The next morning, Thorn Dynamics client portal went down. 3 major hospital networks reported outages in their AI scheduling systems. Data clusters froze mid-query. And then, one by one, their access keys failed. Reset attempts were denied. Server pings returned nothing. I hadn't disabled anything maliciously. I'd simply activated my patents. Legally. The moment Halion Labs entered enforcement mode, Thorn Dynamics' unauthorized deployments became violations. And the systems, bound by contracts she never knew existed, responded accordingly. Investors panicked. Journalists refreshed their feeds. Engineers scrambled. I was at Owen's Diner again, sipping coffee, updating ArcLight's documentation, when I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. "He's losing it. They're all pointing fingers. She hasn't left her office in 18 hours. You were right. I didn't reply. Didn't need to. I opened my laptop, pulled up a private dashboard. ArcLight's live trial through DAX and systems was performing at 130% above benchmark. It had begun generating interest from smaller firms already, startups, universities, think tanks. The quiet hum of adoption had started. And over at Thorn, the silence was turning into static. Preston tried one more time. Another email. This one longer. We should have credited you. I didn't know how deep it ran. Can we find a way to coexist? Let's avoid mutually assured destruction. Mutually assured destruction. That was cute. This wasn't destruction. This was reclamation. I leaned back, watching the news tickers crawl with phrases like plagiarism, IP theft, and foundational instability. I watched Ariella's name get dragged through articles that once praised her brilliance. She hadn't built her kingdom on lies, but she built it on my silence. And now that silence had ended, and the best part? I still hadn't triggered the kill switch. That was scheduled for 3:17 p.m. at the summit. I'd embedded it in a demo protocol she planned to run on stage. That final showcase, the one meant to relaunch confidence in Thorn's technology, would be the moment it all goes dark. Because I didn't want her to crash behind closed doors. I wanted her to stand on stage, in front of every camera, every investor, every journalist, and realize the world she built without me no longer answered to her. It answered to me. At 10:02 a.m., the backstage crew at the Summit of Intelligent Futures was scrambling to replace a faulty uplink cable. I was standing by the loading dock, badge clipped to a hoodie, unnoticed by the swarm of engineers, volunteers, and tech executives. In another hour, I'd walk the same stage Ariella had once claimed like a throne. But today, it wouldn't be her stage. Not anymore. I hadn't planned to speak publicly. I'd spent months working in shadows, beneath headlines, behind shell corporations and patent filings. But sometimes, the truth demands a voice. And sometimes, the only way to make it undeniable is to say it aloud, on the record, where everyone who ignored you before can't look away. ArcLight's final deployment build had been completed just after midnight. The system was humming. No bugs. No warnings. It passed every performance test with room to spare. Its neural mesh interface had even adapted to a novel training scenario I fed it overnight, something Ariella's system would have choked on in seconds. I didn't need validation anymore. I had proof. And proof, in our world, eats applause for breakfast. I stepped into the green room, pulled out my laptop, and loaded the final deck. Simple, clean, black background, white text. No fluff. No transitions. Just data. Facts. Results. One of the volunteers peeked in, tablet in hand. You're on after DR. Young's quantum forecast talk. 10 minutes. Got it. She glanced at me, curious. You nervous? I smiled faintly. No. Just ready. I waited by the curtain. My heart beat steadily. No rush. No panic. Just focus. This wasn't revenge. This was revelation. And she'd be watching. I knew it. She wouldn't miss this summit. The press had already speculated about her absence, especially after the lawsuit and system collapse earlier in the week. But she'd want to see this. She'd want to see what was coming for her throne. Then the lights dimmed. The house fell silent. Next up, the announcer boomed. Marcus Hale, lead systems architect at Halion Labs, unveils the next frontier in autonomous AI. I walked out under white light and blinking strobes. No soundtrack. No roar of applause. Just silence and eyes. Most of them didn't know me. They knew my lawsuit, my co-base, my mysterious company, but not me. That was about to change. I stood at center stage. No podium. Just the clicker in my hand and the truth in my chest. I'll make this simple, I said. You've heard a lot of promises over the years. You've seen 100 demos. You've watched countless platforms claim to be revolutionary. Click. Slide 1. The lie of scale. What they don't tell you about adaptive AI. Murmurs rose. Heads tilted. Phones came out. I designed ArcLight to learn. Not just to react. Not just to patch. To learn, persistently, predictively, and without dependency. Click. Slide 3. A side-by-side comparison of ArcLight and Thorn Dynamics' latest system, handling identical healthcare triage data. Ariella's model lagged behind. Stalled. Required manual calibration. ArcLight rebalanced in milliseconds. You could feel it in the room, the shift, the realization. This isn't a clone, I said. It's not a derivative. It's not a rebuttal. It's the original. The real architecture, the original patents, the true foundation. Click. Slide 4. Engineered by Marcus Hale. IP independently developed. Fully patented. Available now. Then I looked straight into the crowd, and I saw her. Third row, center left. Hair pulled back. No expression. Her eyes locked on mine, unmoving. She didn't blink. I didn't look away. She knew. Everyone else in that room might have just realized it, but she already knew. The system she claimed, the empire she built, the story she told, it all led back here. To this. To me. I didn't mention her name. I didn't have to. The audience stood, wave by wave, until the whole auditorium was on its feet. Phones captured every moment. Arclight's name trended before I even left the stage. People leaned toward me, reaching out to shake my hand, to thank me, to ask questions, but I didn't linger. I didn't bow. I didn't bask. I just walked off stage and turned off my phone. Outside, the sky was bruised with overcast clouds, soft and gray like wet silk. I took the service stairs down, past sound technicians and camera operators, past the back halls where panelists whispered about my presentation like it was some kind of myth come true. I didn't speak to anyone. I got in a rideshare and rode in silence. When I got home, I opened my laptop. Not to check press, not to read reactions, but to monitor system performance. Arclight's server load had spiked 480% in 40 minutes. API requests were flooding in from 5 countries. Inbound interest from firms I'd never pitched. Universities, defense agencies, financial firms, and Thorn Dynamics? Offline. Their main portal had been pulled into maintenance mode. All user-facing systems now read. Temporary service interruption. Their support Twitter feed had disabled replies. Stock forums exploded with speculation. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I just shut the lid of my laptop and sat in the dark for a long time. Because this wasn't vindication. It was closure. The truth had been uploaded. Visible. Undeniable. Unerasable. And now the world knew what I had always known. I built the storm. And now I'd stepped into the light. Thorn Dynamics stock dropped 27% in 24 hours. The market doesn't care about poetry. It doesn't wait for clarifications or apologies. It reads patterns, reacts to noise, and sniffs blood faster than any journalist. One moment, Ariella was the face of innovation, a poster child for scale and brilliance. The next, she was a cautionary tale. Headlines that once fawned now dissected. Investors whispered of negligence. Commentators speculated on criminal liability. And behind every report, every opinion piece, every Reddit thread tagged #Codegate, there was one unshakable truth rising like steam from a cracked circuit board. She didn't build it. She didn't even understand it. I watched the media pivot in real time, the way wolves circle a wounded animal once they smell the limp. Screenshots of Slack messages leaked. Anonymous whistleblowers emerged. One engineer, using the pseudonym CodeGhost, posted on Medium. We were told to make it work, even when we didn't know what it was. Ariella never explained how the system worked, because she didn't know. That post got 1 million views in 48 hours. Meanwhile, discovery began in the lawsuit. That was the real dagger. Emails, change logs, commit histories, all of it was subpoenaed. And what emerged was exactly what I'd known for years. She hadn't just lifted pieces of my code. She built an entire company on a version of it that she neither authored nor understood. Internal memos surfaced. Threads of frantic engineers asking for architecture diagrams that didn't exist. Source tree comparisons showed functions labeled with my original shorthand, tags only I used. A code expert noted that several modules were built in my original syntax style, a quirk I developed in our earliest prototype. A double underscore for adaptive threads, a method naming format that blended poetry and logic, like underscore Nexus Bloom and underscore Veil Shift. Those were mine, and now they were evidence. Thorn Dynamics lawyers scrambled to argue shared inspiration. They claimed I had abandoned contribution when I stepped away from the board. But that was the thing, they'd locked me out. And then they pretended I'd never been there. But you can't erase fingerprints from DNA. Every day, more partners pulled out. Retailers dropped licensing agreements. 2 of their biggest enterprise clients, Gaia-Tech and Astries, publicly terminated contracts citing breach of trust and IP irregularities. I didn't gloat. There was no need. The truth was doing what truth always does when you give it time and proof. It burned through the noise like acid. Ariella tried to fight it, at first. Released a statement. We believed we had original IP. Believed. That word struck me like a dull thud in the chest. Belief isn't proof. Belief is an ownership. You don't get to believe something belongs to you just because you repeated the lie enough times. Not when the code tells a different story. I thought of all the nights I'd stayed up debugging frameworks while she slept. The times I'd written patches on the fly before investor demos. The moments she thanked me in private and took the credit in public. I thought of the nights I stared at the ceiling, wondering if I was overreacting. If maybe she deserved the spotlight because she was the one brave enough to stand in it. But now, the light had turned harsh, unforgiving, and what it revealed wasn't a visionary. It was a scavenger. The irony? She didn't even steal the code. She stole the meaning of it. Because you can lift code, fork systems, refactor logic. But the meaning, the architecture beneath the architecture, the way pieces harmonize instead of compete, that's something only the original mind can carry. And now, with everything falling apart, Ariella was being asked to rebuild something she never truly held in her hands. It showed in her interviews. The poise was gone. The polish stripped. Her eyes, once razor-sharp behind rimless glasses, looked tired. In a hastily arranged Q&A on a niche financial news site, she gave clipped, shallow answers. One tech reporter asked her to walk through the design logic of ThornOS's prediction model. She paused, froze, then said, "That was more of a team effort. It was a lie. That part, the prediction model, was the heart of the code I buried inside ThornOS. It was what made the system appear intelligent, like it understood causality. Without it, Thorn Dynamics was just another skin-deep interface with a shiny dashboard and broken insights. And now, without access to that architecture, the company wasn't just bleeding. It was hollow. I got an email from one of their junior developers. Anonymously. It simply read, "I didn't know. I'm sorry." I replied, "You weren't supposed to know. That's how they designed it." Because that was the truth. Most of the people at Thorn Dynamics weren't evil. They were just compartmentalized. Fed the brand. Kept distant from the core. Ariella didn't want a team. She wanted a spotlight. And now that the spotlight was turning toxic, she had no shadows to hide in. One night, I walked past the Thorn Dynamics building. I stood across the street, hood up, hands in my pockets. It looked the same, modern, gleaming, efficient. The lights still burned on the higher floors. But something about it felt empty, like the shell of a brilliant lie. I stared at the logo etched into the glass and remembered painting that first version on a corkboard in our old apartment. I'd sketched it with a Sharpie. She laughed at how crooked it was. Back then, it was ours. Now it was just a monument to what she'd taken and what I'd reclaimed. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt still, like standing in the quiet after a storm, watching pieces fall where they may. And the world? The world was watching too. It didn't arrive with fanfare. No press leaks. No live statement. Just a quiet headline on an industry blog posted at 6:12 a.m., buried beneath more pressing tech gossip and regulatory updates. Ariella Thorn steps down as CEO of Thorn Dynamics. No drama. No deflection. No quote from her legal team. Just the end of a chapter written in borrowed ink. I was standing at my kitchen counter when I saw it. Coffee cooling beside my hand. Laptop open. A dozen tabs blinking updates from ArcLights back in metrics. The message was short, almost surgical. She was stepping away to pursue new creative ventures, thanking the brilliant minds who had made Thorn Dynamics what it was. No admission of guilt, no mention of me, and certainly no apology. But I didn't expect one. I leaned against the sink, the morning sun cutting across the floor in long amber lines, and stared at her official statement, posted on Thorn's company site just minutes before the news broke. The image struck me first. A black and white portrait Ariella, half-turned, sharp jawline. I shadowed, but proud. It looked like something meant for a biography, not a resignation. Carefully curated. Timeless, if you didn't know the truth behind the pixels. Her words were even more polished. Leadership is not about holding on. It's about knowing when to pass the torch. I'm proud of what we've accomplished, and I leave with nothing but gratitude for the journey. Gratitude. That word made something twist in my chest. Because the last time I saw gratitude in her eyes, it was in the form of a soft thank you whispered before a keynote. I had handed her the last bug-free prototype 2 hours before she went on stage, after pulling a 16-hour coding sprint to get it functional. She kissed my cheek, stepped into the lights, and introduced herself as the sole architect of the future. That was 3 years ago. Now here we were. I didn't check social media right away. I didn't need to. I could already imagine the comments. Supportive messages from loyal fans, industry peers offering tired platitudes about new chapters, and undoubtedly, a few defensive voices accusing me of jealousy, of sabotage. There would be those who still believed in the illusion. That's how stories work. Once a lie is loved, the truth becomes the villain. But the part that lingered wasn't the public reaction. It was the email. She sent it at 4:49 a.m. Subject: You win. What do you want? No salutation. No signature. Just 6 words. 6 words that carried the weight of years, of love twisted into rivalry, of partnership rewritten as hierarchy. I sat with that email for a long time. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I could have said 1,000 things. I could have listed damages, demands, terms, pain points. I could have asked for an apology, real, public, raw. I could have made her put the truth in ink the same way she'd tried to bury mine. Instead, I typed something, then deleted it. Not out of mercy. Not out of forgiveness. But because I realized something even more powerful than justice. I didn't want anything from her. Not anymore. I had the truth. I had the code. I had the name on the patents and the system that was now powering infrastructure in 4 countries and being considered for implementation in 2 national election frameworks. ArcLight was more than a product. It was an operating philosophy. It was proof that silence doesn't mean surrender and that you can be erased from a room without ever truly leaving it. What did I want? The silence that comes after truth. And that silence had finally arrived. Still, I couldn't help but remember who she used to be. There was a time, years ago, when we were building side by side. Just 2 kids trying to force the future into existence with laptops and stubborn belief. Back then, she would stay up with me until 2 a.m. debugging my logic, tweaking interface elements, arguing over whether minimalism was always optimal. She laughed with me. She believed in us. But belief isn't a guarantee. It's a risk. And somewhere along the way, she decided her odds were better without me. Maybe she was right for a while. But the long game belongs to the ones who build, not the ones who brand. Later that day, I walked through the old office building where Thorn Dynamics had its first startup space. A 3rd-floor unit above a Mexican restaurant, where the power flickered every time someone used the microwave. The building was mostly empty now. A few real estate flyers taped to the doors. The smell of old carpet and desperation clinging to the hallways. I stood outside that office for a while, staring at the door. The number had faded. The brass knob was scratched and dull. I remembered the early days vividly. Hauling in second-hand desks, taping router cables to the floor, using cardboard boxes as whiteboards. That space had held every dream we dared to have. Back then, we didn't care who got the credit. We just wanted it to work. I didn't go inside. There was no point. That chapter was sealed. Instead, I walked 3 blocks west, past the park where we used to take lunch breaks on the bench near the koi pond. I sat there for the first time in years. The pond was still murky. The same orange and white koi lazily circled near the surface. I took out my phone, opened the resignation announcement again, and just stared. People were sharing it with comments like "end of an era," "respect," and "looking forward to what she does next." That's the thing with stories. They don't always reflect what really happened. They reflect what people want to believe happened. Some people would always remember her as the innovator, the one who brought AI to life. Some would see her as a fallen figure, a lesson in hubris. Others wouldn't care at all. They'd just move on to the next headline. But I knew what happened. And so did she. In the end, it wasn't about the lawsuits or the system shutdowns or even ArcLight's success. It was about standing in front of the machine I built and knowing, without needing anyone else's approval, that I had done something real. That the hours I poured into whiteboard sketches and late-night code marathons weren't wasted just because someone tried to claim them. They were mine. Always were. I opened her email one last time. Reread those 6 words. Closed it. Then I archived it. That evening, I walked past a bookstore and saw a display in the window. Women Who Changed the Future. Her face was on the cover of one of the books. Still printed, still published, still praised. I paused, stared for a moment, and then smiled, not bitter, not mocking. Just calm. Let the world keep their myths. I had something better. I had the source code. And this time, I wasn't sharing it with anyone who hadn't earned it. 6 months ago, she called me incompetent. Not to my face, of course. Ariella was too careful for that. She said it during a panel interview, somewhere between her usual lines about innovation and discipline. Not everyone is built for execution, she'd said, her voice silky under stage lights. Some people are better at dreaming than doing. The audience laughed politely. The moderator smiled. And I sat in the dark, watching her discard me with a sentence. No? I own the patents, the trademarks, the architecture, the future. ArcLight wasn't just a product anymore. It was an ecosystem, a standard. Governments used it to track emergency logistics. Hospitals used it to triage care. Elections ran smoother. Fraud detection sharpened. Entire departments of people who once dismissed me were now building on top of my foundation. And for once, my name wasn't tucked behind someone else's spotlight. It was on the front of the brochure, on the keynote slides, on the legal documents. Marcus Hale, chief architect, founder of Halion Labs. I didn't chase applause. I chased clarity. And clarity rewarded me with contracts, equity, and a voice in rooms I once couldn't enter without someone else's invitation. I gave interviews selectively, spoke on panels sparingly. I wore clean suits with no logos. Let my work speak while others scrambled to find the next hype cycle. I wasn't the angry man from the lawsuit. I was the guy who wrote code that didn't flinch under pressure. Ariella, though, she was somewhere I couldn't quite place anymore. I caught wind of her on a second-tier tech podcast, something shot in someone's spare bedroom with poor lighting and a clickbait title, The Rise, Fall, and Rise Again. She looked tired, leaner, like the spotlight had burned more than it revealed. She still spoke in polished lines, still wore that poised look. But the certainty was gone. At one point, the host asked, looking back, "What would you say was your biggest mistake?" She gave a long pause, then said, "Success is a team effort." I just chose the wrong team. No names. Just blame in a new wrapping. I turned off the video. No need to finish. That wasn't closure. That was her trying to rewrite her ending one last time. But I had already archived our story in full. Later that night, I deployed a new ArcLight update, adaptive trust modules, something she would have never understood. Too subtle, too intricate. It wasn't built for applause. It was built to work. I didn't toast. I didn't celebrate. I just closed the laptop, stepped into the night air, and breathed. Because revenge wasn't a headline. It was a clean line of code, perfectly executed. Just like I planned.